Travel in the Asia-Pacific region is at its highest level in 5 years. New markets and a growing middle class have seen a rapid increase in passenger demand. For more on this, let's go to our correspondent Scott Heidler. He's live for us from the Singapore Airshow, which is Asia's biggest aerospace exhibition. And how's the industry, so how is it dealing, Scott, with the rapid growth, with so many more people taking to the Asia-Pacific skies?
Well, Elizabeth, it has been the fastest growing and the largest in the airline industry. As you said, you've got new markets because the economies are growing here, so more middle class people are able to travel, so that creates new passengers, new airports, and new markets. But the big question that arises is, are the governments and the airlines expanding the industry properly? 1 out of every 3 airline passengers in the world last year took off or landed in the Asia-Pacific region. Growing middle classes and new markets are pushing industry numbers up. Last year, the number of passengers here grew 8% more than anywhere else in the world. A soaring demand for more flights means the need for more airports. Industry leaders say if governments remain focused on global standards, there's no reason why growth should come at the expense of safety. After the U.S. aviation regulator in December downgraded Thailand's safety rating, that issue is more in focus than ever.
There's some wake-up calls around the region where the United States FAA, for example, has downgraded the Thailand, and there are some other countries around the region where I believe governments are now having to work to step up to the plate.
Many new airlines have taken to the air. That's causing established airlines to rethink how they operate. In financial trouble, Thai Airways is in the middle of restructuring. This puts it at a disadvantage in the short term, but may make it more competitive in the longer term.
While we are restructuring, which means our cost base is high, most of our competitor, because of the oil price, they keep dropping the price as well, right? I mean, whereas their cost base is low.
The growth of the airline industry here in Asia Pacific has been so rapid over the last 10 years, there are concerns that the infrastructure is not keeping pace, and that airlines are scrambling for experienced pilots and proper training. Years ago, most airline pilots came from the military. Not anymore.
The training of pilots is done by airlines and flying schools, and that system works well, but it does again have to keep pace with the growth in demand. Airlines can always find enough pilots, but they may not like what they have to pay them.
That means regional shortages of pilots drive up salaries. So while the demand for these seats is increasing in Asia Pacific, there are challenges. For the airlines, the challenge is to expand carefully in this era of thinning profit margins. And for the governments, to make sure that safety standards do not slide as the industry expands and demands new, busier airports. The figures show the last 5 years of commercial aviation have been safer than the previous 5. This is a trend airlines and governments will want to maintain. And to discuss this further, we're going to bring in Matthew Driskill. He's the editor of Asian Aviation. Now Matthew, thank you for joining us this morning. When we look at this expansion, big numbers, it's been the darling of the industry, this region. Is it being done properly by the airlines and the governments?
I think the airlines, yeah. I mean, 10 years ago, when you looked at a lot of things that were happening, you had some problems in Indonesia with infrastructure. Garuda Airlines went through a lot of problems. It was banned from Europe for a time. But you're seeing a lot of the fleets for airlines that are being renewed. They're buying a lot of new airplanes, and the governments from China to Indonesia, everywhere in Southeast Asia, they're putting more money into infrastructure. They're putting more money into airports, and they realize that this is an industry that people are going to travel. And as you've been hearing people here at the show talk about, that market, the middle market that's expanding in Asia, those people are going to travel. They've got money in their pockets. And so the governments recognize they've got a job to do, and the airlines, they recognize they've got a job to do. And they're not going to make money if people are afraid to fly or if the infrastructure is not there when you're flying into some of these new places that are being served by low-cost carriers. So is it being done properly? I think so, because everybody recognizes they've got a business to protect.
Definitely, and when you look at profit margins, they're thinning a little bit, and one thing that's coming into play right now, ironically, the lower oil price sometimes makes it difficult for some of these airlines. Explain that a little bit.
Well, the problem is the low oil prices, they may be low now, and at $30 a barrel, that's great. The problem is 6 months from now, that could change. You had some agreements that happened yesterday or the day before, I think with Saudi Arabia and some other people on trying to get a bottom to the price. The problem is for the airlines, yes, oil's at $30 today a barrel, but they hedged. They booked their contracts at $90 a barrel. Singapore Airlines came out with its revenue figures the other day, and they're hedging oil at $90 a barrel. So they've still got to pay those contracts, and that's why people say, well, why isn't my ticket cheaper when I'm traveling to Bangkok or I'm traveling to China? It's because they still got to pay for that $90 contract of oil.
And when you look at, you were talking about infrastructure and the industry and the airlines and the government's picking up the pace, if you will. Let's talk about pilots, because there was a discussion that there weren't enough pilots, or there weren't enough well-trained pilots. And long ago, their military was a natural feeder. That's not the case anymore. How's the pilot situation in Asia Pacific?
I was looking at some of that last night. There's definitely sort of a shortage, especially when you see the growth of the low-cost carriers. So, I've been flying since you could still smoke on an airplane. That tells you how old I am. And you had the stereotypical pilot of a guy who was in the military. He's got the salt and pepper, the gray hair, and that's someone that you looked and really wanted to see up there. It gave you a sense of confidence. Now you've got more women pilots. You've got younger pilots that are coming into the system. And again, the low-cost carriers are driving it. They're ordering lots of new planes, whether it's Air Asia, whether it's Tiger Air, whether it's Scoot or NOC or any of these others. So there's naturally going to be a lag of trying to fill those seats. Again, I think the airlines are trying to do the best they can. You'll notice that at some of the stands around here, there's a big component on training. Singapore's trying to do a lot in that respect. So they got to fill the seats to fly safely. And IATA, the International Air Transport Association, came out. I was just looking at some figures. 2015, one of the safest years ever, 37.6 million flights last year. I
apologize, we've lost that connection with Singapore. Our correspondent Scott Heidler at the Singapore Airshow there. Okay, let's move on now to the US, where more than 2 million people struggle with